Ghost of Tsushima is a game that was enjoyed by many during release. It was praised for having an authentic and new setting and fun gameplay. This was basically compared to Assassin's Creed a lot and still does in many instances. And with how the game plays, I can't blame the people who do. Ghost of Tsushima is a game that is inspired by several open world games. It basically takes the open world formula and refines it in some ways, whilst not so much in others. And today I'll be talking about that in this in-depth critique of Ghost of Tsushima. We'll be looking over most of the game's crucial mechanics from a critical viewpoint and seeing its flaws and what could have been improved and of course what it does well. This will only look at the base game though and no DLCs whatsoever, as I didn't really have much time to do that. So sorry guys, I might do a separate video on Iki Island if this one does well. Again, before I start this video, I'd like to say that this is purely my opinion what I think the game does and what it does not. So if you want the video that endlessly praises this game, then you're probably in for a disappointment. Anyway, before I start, don't forget to hit a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and without further ado, let's jump into this critique. Ghost of Tsushima has a pretty neat structure with 3 story acts, having a sole objective and end goal. I think it's quite cool as a player that you feel like you're achieving something at the end of every act and making progress in the game. I also like how you're pushing forward as you defeat the Mongols along the way. You literally start from the bottom of the map and work your way up throughout the story, which is also a neat way to show progression. The game's prologue is also superb in my opinion, as it introduces the high stakes involved in the story, the general gameplay mechanics, and of course the open world all in a pretty organic way. I have to say, the fucking tile drop of this game is one of the best I've seen done in a video game in recent times, as it feels so seamless as the score builds up and the game reveals itself through its world and its colorful feels. Ghost of Tsushima is absolutely stunning. What I especially like about it is that how stylistic it looks, like I'm transported into a painting. The beautiful fields of different flowers, the snowy mountains, scenic shores. Like I just kept taking pictures in the photo mode, which I'd say is the best one ever done in a video game. With so much variety and options, I could just end up taking pictures all day. This game might not be the most advanced looking in terms of graphics, but god does it look beautiful. And it clearly just shows how strong of a role art direction plays in setting your game apart from others. Another minor detail that I like is that the camera is centered whilst you're riding the horse, so your view of the open world isn't blocked by it. Some people might find this camera placement a little odd compared to other games, but I really dig it. One thing I appreciate about the exploration in Ghost of Tsushima is that you can pick up supplies on the go. You never have to get off your horse, which makes everything simple, quick and efficient, and I love that. It really adds a huge difference to the game and makes the exploration feel as seamless and uninterrupted as possible, which is a welcome change that Ghost of Tsushima makes to the open world formula. A major component of exploration in Ghost of Tsushima is a guiding wind mechanic to lead you to the next mission objective. These really do make a difference in immersion, as I'm constantly looking at the world to navigate and not some stupid minimap. It's a strong feature, and what I also like about it is that the wind also serves as a narrative purpose, as it is meant to be Jin's dad's spirit guiding him through the grave. There's also the golden birds that guide you to the nearest points of interest, whether it be high Q spots, hot springs, or side missions. These also have a narrative importance as they're meant to be his mother's spirit helping you. I love when games intertwine gameplay mechanics with the story, as it adds so much more depth and meaning to them and shows that the devs care. And Ghost of Tsushima really does it pretty effectively in communicating the connection that Jin had with his parents in a very subtle way. Now these two are good additions to the game, but I don't really get much of a point of foxes. They lead you to the nearby Inari shrines, which helps unlock charm slots. Like, I do like the idea of foxes guiding me to shrines, but honestly it loses its charm pretty quickly as it becomes so predictable where they're leading you. I feel like foxes shouldn't have been tied to just the shrines, and instead they can lead you to anything interesting in the world, or they should have just been removed completely, as it feels like it defeats the point of having them if it's really more or less the same thing as the birds, yet more predictable and lame. Climbing is another way of exploring the world of Ghost of Tsushima, yet I must say that traversal in Ghost is a joke, and it makes the parkour from the new AC games look fun. It's pretty much just a set path of rocks that you have to follow to get up, making it even more hand-holded than the new AC games. This is even exposed further with the Shinto shrines that don't really offer any sort of challenge or navigation puzzle. They just want you to follow on their own marked path, which is boring. And like the fox shrines, these become extremely predictable too. That's one common pattern I noticed with Ghost of Tsushima's side content and a lot of other open world games, which is repetition. I'll get to discussing more of what is wrong with the side content later, but yeah, traversing isn't it. The addition of the grappling hook though does add some complexity to climbing, however it's too basic a system. Even though Ghost of Tsushima isn't really a game known for complex parkour or traversal, it's still a feature in the game and it does need to be criticized. I feel like most open world games can't help but put climbing and vertical traversing features in the game, but they are just so shallow and hand-holded, man. I know these games have no choice but to add them, especially if you want the player to navigate environments vertically, but I'm sure there must be a way to make it more interesting rather than being just a means to go from A to B. Like having multiple routes to get to shrines or having collapsible environments that may affect your path, which makes you think on the fly and improvise. That's why I wish not just Ghost of Yotei but other open world games start thinking about this. The combat in Ghost of Tsushima is fast, fluid and extremely polished. I really like the fast-paced nature of combat and the fact that it does get challenging facing a herd of different types of enemies, so it always prioritizes being on your toes. Since enemies can inflict just as much damage as you can, which keeps fights tense. When enemies attack you, the red light means you have to dodge the attack as it can't be blocked, and blue light means that the attack can be parried. Now parrying in this game feels so satisfying, man, especially if you can parry and counter attack them at the right moment. It requires a bit of patience and timing, but it feels so good, man. It especially helps you significantly during bosses, as mastering the parrying is the key to beat most of them. I do wish that the bosses in the game had other ways to be beaten besides parrying though, but I'll get to that topic a little later. To combat the different types of enemies you face in this game, you have stances, and different enemies are weak to different stances. The stone stance is effective towards normal enemies, the water stance is effective towards shield enemies, the wind stance is effective towards enemies with axes and spears, and lastly the moon stance is effective towards these big guys. Defeating or observing Mongol leaders throughout the game unlocks these stances. As much as I like the idea of stances that encourage you to keep changing and experimenting with different movesets, I do find it quite cumbersome to switch between them during combat, as it sort of ruins the flow of things, which is why I didn't really like changing stances all that often in combat. I would say maybe there should have been a better way to switch between these stances more seamlessly without breaking the flow of combat. I also hate it when the game pauses in between to remind you to switch stances, even though I didn't want to, which just ruined the combat experience for me. Standoffs are also a cool addition to the combat, yet I would say that it doesn't take much skill to use, as most of the time I could land clean hits on the enemy. It would have been interesting if this system was more challenging against more skilled and fast enemies, therefore pushing you to act quick. I kinda wish this system was more like the standoffs from Red Dead Redemption, as you have to keep pressing the button successive amount of times and in quick succession to improve your chances of landing the strike. It would have made it slightly more interesting and fun, because admittingly pulling off the standoffs does get bland after a while and requires little challenge or thinking and gives you a good head start in combat without doing much. They do have some enemies who use fake attacks to trick you, but these are so predictable that you get used to it. Lastly, we have the Ghost stance. Now this feature is fucking badass, especially with how it's introduced in the story. It's when Jin finally embraces the way of the ghost, using fear as a tool to drive out the Mongols. Also later on in the game, Mongols literally start running away from you in fear, and it's a great way to show the sheer influence and the progress we have made as a ghost, and generally feels badass to see. The mechanic can basically insta-kill up to 3 enemies, and the visuals are so cool to see as well, man. It can basically be activated by killing multiple enemies without taking damage or killing the leader using stealth, which makes this stance feel rewarding to use as you feel encouraged to take on the challenge of not being hit, or using stealth to take out the leader. I appreciate that the combat keeps getting challenging throughout the game, especially when they introduce the rodent type enemies. Even when I was making progress and getting stronger, the combat still felt challenging enough to keep things interesting and never dull. Facing all the rodent enemies together proved a tough challenge, so I was always engaged and locked in during combat encounters. The combat in Ghost of Tsushima is definitely the best gameplay mechanic in the game, as it offers challenge, is extremely polished and looks really cool and badass, especially when you are ending the suffering of these enemies. My one minor nitpick though is that the combat has no lock-on option, which is strange, and it does make it slightly more messy in my opinion, as a few times I couldn't land clean hits on the enemy even though they were within my vicinity. Now getting to the stealth, I hate to break it to you, but stealth in Ghost of Tsushima is quite shallow, as it doesn't offer much variety of play compared to other games. It's the same standard crouch behind enemy and kill them. It doesn't offer anything new in the stealth genre in my opinion, which is the reason why stealth games are dying out, as it's just one feature you can do in any game now as opposed to being its own unique thing. It really feels like I'm playing a stealth game from the 2010s or something, rather than being something original or new. It also doesn't help that the game just offers you the same generic tools to use during stealth. There's just the standard smoke bombs, sticky bombs, wind chimes, firecrackers for distraction, and the bow and arrow, which don't really offer much ways of creative play. The enemy AI is also pretty dated and predictable, making them fairly easy to take out. Especially with the stealth takedowns being so aggressive that the guards shout out after being taken out and no one even hears them out. Like what? Remind you that this game came out in 2020 alongside The Last of Us Part 2, a game with one of the best enemy AI in punishing stealth, yet it still feels leagues behind from that game in terms of stealth. There's not much risk in doing stealth and you can clear out pretty much most of the camps without thinking, which eliminates the need of strategizing and being conscious of your every move. That's one element of what makes stealth fun and challenging, yet this game lacks that. Besides a handful of upgrades and tools, stealth just never evolves throughout the game either, so you don't really get this feeling of slowly progressing and learning to become the ghost, as Jin pretty much starts and ends the game pretty much with the similar stealth skills. It just feels far more efficient to enter combat most of the times to wipe out the enemies than going the stealth route, as it provides no extra rewards or extrinsic motivation for the player to engage with it. There really isn't ever a moment where stealth feels more beneficial than open combat. And considering that Jin's whole arc is basically abandoning the way of the samurai and embracing the identity of the ghost, it heavily undercuts the impact of the narrative, as I saw no reason within the gameplay as to why Jin would resort to these methods when you can clear out a camp of guards from fighting no problem, and it's clearly more fun as well. There's just far too much importance and time put on making the combat fun and fulfilling, and less so on the stealth, even though it should be given equal importance. I do hope they rectify this with the sequel, as they have big shoes to fill, especially when Assassin's Creed Shadows does a much better job in that area. Though I would say I did enjoy using the bow and arrow quite a bit in this game, especially with the slowdown ability. One thing I like about launching an arrow is that whilst you're aiming, you have to account for the fact that it will have a projectile pathway and not straight, which does make getting headshots slightly more challenging, but it does feel satisfying to get that clean hit. Now getting to the side content, and boy, we have quite a few of them in Ghost of Tsushima. Now first of all, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, there are Ubisoft style bandit camps in Ghost of Tsushima, and there are quite a few of them. I appreciate that they act as playgrounds for stealth and combat, but come on, there are so many of them in this game that it stops being fun really quickly. With the same checkbox like objectives you gotta do, it feels so mundane and repetitive, and I stopped doing them after a while. In fact, I was visibly annoyed when I saw that I discovered a bandit camp and actively avoided them. Like it or not, this game does have a lot of Ubisoft DNA in it, which is especially true with all the different collectibles, bandit camps and towers you have to liberate. Other than that, there are hot springs that you can relax and reflect in, which allow your maximum health to increase. High-Q spots are pretty much the same idea, yet honestly I felt that the way they have been implemented in the game is just so lackluster. There is not a lot to do besides moving your controller around, picking the line and you're done. It doesn't help that it only rewards you with a small cosmetic. I just wish these were more interesting, as it feels like it defeats the point of doing these if the game just gives you the lines. It would have been far better if you can figure out these lines yourself through clues hidden in the environment. It would have made this side activity far more interactive and fun to do besides just aimlessly selecting lines already given to you. I think the only time I would say that they are done effectively is when Jen finally returns home to get his armor and reflect on everything that has happened, also with the tales involving Yuriko and towards the ending, which are the only times when there is some narrative weight and depth in this activity. Haikyuu is probably my least favorite activity to do in this game, to be honest, right after the bandit camps of course, and I sincerely hope that they find a way to improve upon them with Yote. On the other hand, I did enjoy bamboo strikes quite a lot, as they do present you with a good challenge and also test your timing. It just feels so satisfying to finally slash through all bamboo. Doing this help increases your resolve, which can be used to heal yourself during battle. I would say from Haikyuu, hot springs and bamboo strikes, the bamboo strikes are easily my favorite, as it does offer you something fun to do. The hot springs I can somewhat understand why you would want to do them, but Haikyuus being more or less the same idea kinda defeats the point of doing them, to be honest, which is why making Haikyuus more like the environmental puzzles would have at least helped distinguish itself from the rest. Then we have the Tales side missions. Now I like what they're doing narratively, as they flesh out the characters that will be helping and supporting your fight with the Mongols, and they all mean something to Jin's character arc. But man, I have to say that doing the missions themselves are really repetitive, as you're pretty much doing the same thing over and over and over again. You first investigate what happened in the area, follow some tracks and then kill some Mongols. Rinse and repeat. Other than that, you just follow a person to a Mongol hideout just like an average tailing mission from an AC game, and you guessed it, kill some Mongols. Like, would it kill to have some variety with these missions? This is the problem with most of the side missions in this game, and there are very few memorable ones in my opinion. Which is why after a point, I felt tired and bored of doing these side missions, as they very much felt like bloated slop put in to waste your time. Mythical Tales are somewhat of an improvement over the basic side content, and I do like that they each vary, as you learn the legend behind each move or special equipment and set out to obtain them. Although some of them aren't the best, like the Gosaku armor, which involves liberating farms to get keys for unlocking it. Seriously, this is the worst way they could have come up with unlocking a cool piece of armor. It's just so uninspiring and so much like Ubisoft. Hell, even Ubisoft games have much better side missions for unlocking a cool armor. That being said, I do like most of the other Mythical Tales, as you learn these cool OP moves after beating these duels at the end. They aren't perfect, and I do think that they should improve on them in the sequel, but at least they are better than the regular side content, which I guess isn't really saying much. We also have cool duels you can do in this game, and they're fun initially, and I like that they all take place in pretty scenic locations. However, it's pretty underwhelming that the attack patterns of most of the bosses you face are quite similar, and they become way too predictable after doing a few, which kills any amount of fun or challenge personally. I wish there would have been different tactics that could have been used to beat each boss, but it just ends up being the same attack chains that you have to parry and heavy attacks you have to dodge. And once you know what attack they're gonna do, you can just finish it quick and move on. There's no challenge that's pushing you whatsoever, which as I said ruins it a bit for me. I sincerely hope that with Ghost of Yote they have more variety in the type of bosses you can face. I think overall what I want to say with the side content of Ghost of Tsushima is that it's not that it's inherently bad. In fact, it's quite fun to do them for the first couple hours. But there's just far too much of the same thing over and over again, which makes the game more bloated than it should be. I feel like this is one bad quality that Ghost of Tsushima has picked up from the Ubisoft open world formula, and I sincerely hope they tone it down or at least try and make the side content more varied and interesting in the sequel. As this obsession with having more and more activities to do in the open world comes at a huge cost of quality. And it just ultimately makes you feel like you're wasting your time when you should be doing something else, something more important like chores or something. And when you start thinking that's more important, you know you've gone wrong with the game design somewhere. As you do activities and missions in the game, your legend grows and it shows what the people will remember you as. I like the idea of this, yet I don't really feel like there is a difference in the way the civilians in the world perceive you, before and after jumping between different statuses. I feel the same treatment being a normal warrior and a hero of Tsushima, which kind of undermines the point of having this system. I don't really have much to say in the matter of customization and skills, as it's like your average game with ability points that you can assign in learning a certain skill, and the charms that you collect that can give you certain traits that can help you in the gameplay. Weapons and armor upgrades are also pretty self-explanatory, and I won't really get into it. It's just an average system, and I guess it works, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't want anything new with these systems. I wish there was a way there was more depth into them instead of being a shallow skill tree type progression. One thing I would say though is that the armor and armor dyes in this game look pretty cool, and it's nice that you can customize the way your outfit looks. Out of all the armors though, the ghost armor is easily my favorite. It just looks so badass, man. Now let's talk a bit about the Legends mode. The Legends mode changes things up a bit with a different vibe entirely to the main game, being mostly focused on supernatural elements. This is where you capture points in the map and defend them amongst oncoming waves, and with each oncoming wave it gets tougher and tougher, which keeps things tense. You also have boss waves every 3 rounds, which are more tougher than the usual waves, and they throw challenges at the players like blinding you out of nowhere. I appreciate these as they keep things interesting. There's 4 classes you can play as. First is the Samurai, which is basically offensive type, the Hunter, which mainly uses bow and arrow, the Assassin, which uses stealth, and the Ronin, who's more of a healer and can raise the dead. These are cool, and each class has their own unique special ability. I like the classes, however it's kind of redundant that you can use all the tools that you can in the base game as any class. Like what? Then what was the point of differentiating them? Also, since you'll be in combat most of the time, it makes no sense to have the assassin class unless you're playing on your own. I did it because I have no friends, which does give you the added layer of challenge, which is where you would traditionally use stealth. Even facing the waves alone is quite a challenge and pretty tough to do alone. I mostly like this mode, but I have to say, 15 waves are quite a lot to face, and I feel like the rounds drag on for far too long because of this, and it could get pretty exhausting. I feel like 10 rounds should have been the maximum instead of 15. Like the base game, it does get pretty repetitive facing so many enemies over and over again. There's also a separate story mode that this mode has, but again, I didn't really play that much of this mode, mostly because I'm not really into online games, mainly because I don't have any friends. Getting to the narrative of Ghost of Tsushima, let's start with Act 1 first. Act 1 of Ghost is a bit slow, I'll admit, especially if you do the tail side missions, which feel like such a drag honestly, and towards the end of this act, I already start feeling a bit fatigued with the side content, which isn't really a positive sign, especially when I'm only a third of the way through the game. I do appreciate that it takes its time to introduce us to the key characters and the open world, and how that all culminates to rescuing Lord Shimura. The flashbacks in Act 1 also do a great job at juxtaposing with the present to reflect Jin's inner struggle, and how he's torn between his honor and his overwhelming sense of justice, and doing what's right even if it comes at the cost of breaking his code and potentially losing himself. I also must say that Khotun Khan is quite an underrated villain in my opinion, with his dirty mind tricks and menacing demeanor. He serves as a foil for Jin's character, as if he can't fully control himself as the ghost, he'll just become a monster like him. This is especially more evident towards the end of Act 2 when he poisons all the Mongols and kills Ryuzu without a single regret. We see Jin at his darkest here in my opinion, and you can somewhat agree that his actions here were quite heinous. The entire climax of Act 2 in general is awesome, as it builds a wedge between Shimura and Jin finally embracing and losing himself to the ghost and saying farewell to our dear horse companion. I actually felt really sad during that scene, considering that all the times you spend with that horse and how you remember those small subtle moments with it after completing each tale. It just helps make me care about it and see it as a dear friend. It's pretty amazing that this game can do that without doing too much at the same time. But it's such a shame that the rest of Act 2 isn't really of the same quality, as it can pretty much be a slow drag which definitely hurts the pacing of the story. It's definitely weaker than Act 1 in some ways, as missions go on for far more longer than they should. A major criticism that I have with the game's narrative is the way that it portrays samurai as a stereotypical good and honorable people, which is more a myth than the absolute truth, as some samurais were known to betray their lords if it meant getting higher rewards. Some even abuse their positions of power to harass civilians. I feel like the game doesn't really explore this idea, and that's a shame because this would have worked really well to further build Jin's arc of embracing the ghost as he sees samurai using their honor and power for bad, which makes him question the code. It would have been interesting to see things from a different perspective and something that could have set this game apart from different media who portray a similar time period. Alas, this extremely cliché portrayal of samurai does make this game's narrative slightly one-note and shallow. Now getting to the final act, Act 3, this is where we get to see the consequences of Jin's actions, both positive and negative. The positive being that he united an entire army of people together to fight under a common cause, something that the samurai failed to do. However, the poison he used on the Mongols is now being used against him and also lots of other innocent people. I like that this shows how being the ghost can also bring harm to innocents. But the problem here is that Jin doesn't really reflect on it all that much. He tries to justify himself once, but it's nothing deeper. It doesn't seem like he has any regrets for it. And I get that he had no other choice but to resort to these methods, but I feel like this dehumanizes him a bit, as it's not really human to not have regrets or guilt over your actions. I feel like because of time constraints, they couldn't really explore the moral dilemma of Jin being the ghost properly, which is a shame because it would have made him a far more complex and interesting character. Another thing I would like to say is that the voice acting of Ghost can be a little inconsistent. Like some scenes it's pretty damn good, whilst other it just doesn't really hit. I feel this way especially with Lord Shimura's character, as there were a lot of scenes where I felt like he's too bland and unexpressive that I couldn't really feel the love and respect that he has for Jin through the dialogue, which made it a little difficult for me to care about him or this relationship. It doesn't help that the dialogue writing isn't particularly that great either, with a lot of lines just feeling extremely cliché. I feel like the Japanese dub for this game is significantly better, mainly because it feels a lot more authentic and expressive. Especially Jin's voice acting in the Japanese dub is leagues better, since he's actually voiced by a pretty dominant and experienced voice actor, Kazuya Nakai. I mean, he literally voiced Zoro from One Piece. Even the other characters sounded better to me. Getting to the ending of Ghost of Tsushima, it is simply beautiful with the visuals, cinematics, the tension, the writing, the music. It's just pure cinema. I especially like the detail of red and white in the final fight. I guess red represents a rebirth of Jin as a ghost, whilst white could represent death that he has to face in order to cleanse himself from his past life and fully embrace the life of the ghost. Which is why sparing Lord Shimura clearly makes the most sense and is fitting of Jin's character arc. Even though I'd admit, I did kill him the first time around just to honor him, and also not gonna lie, the white armor you get if you kill him is just so fucking cool and clearly way better than the red one. This ending is superb and it never fails to give me chills. Also, the voice acting here is fantastic. Most of Ghost of Tsushima doesn't really have the most memorable voice acting, but god is it so good during this scene. Especially Lord Shimura, who's like a dull robot most of the game, is suddenly so expressive here. And this is the first and probably the only time where I felt that genuine heartbreak he feels from Jin's actions. It's such a shame that it's this late in the game that I care about his character, because during other times he just feels pretty annoying and more of a hassle than anything. Overall though, Ghost of Tsushima's narrative does have strong moments, and I like the gradual transformation of Jin from samurai to the ghost. However, as I said, this isn't really reflected well by the gameplay, as most of the focus and energy is put on combat instead of stealth. There's also pacing issues, especially during Act 2, that bogs it down slightly, but it ends on a high note, and that's one thing most games struggle to do. Ghost of Tsushima is a game that doesn't necessarily evolve the open world formula but refines it. It feels like a familiar game that you've already played, yet in a good way. It's basically if you took a Ubisoft game and highly polished its mechanics and gameplay. Albeit the one bad thing that it borrows from those styles of games are lots of side content that feel bloated and just waste your time at the end of the day. It also doesn't do much to evolve stealth in a creative and meaningful ways and opts for a safe route instead. Which is a shame, as this would have definitely helped differentiate it from other stealth games, namely Assassin's Creed. But with all that in mind, I still enjoy this game. Yeah, sure, it's familiar and something that I've already played, yet it still managed to keep itself fun through its fast-paced combat and its beautiful open world. Part of the reason why I still enjoyed the early Ubisoft games, despite their flaws. They had heart in them and had a certain charm. Ghost of Tsushima isn't something groundbreaking, yet it is refining things that already worked, and I cannot be mad at that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this critique. Like and subscribe if you did, and let me know if you guys agree or not with my criticisms about this game and what you think could be better with Ghost of Yotei. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys pretty soon with another video. See ya!